The wind howled across the barren plains of Redemption Creek, carrying with it the sting of sand and the promise of another merciless day. Elijah McRae stood at the edge of his property, squinting against the harsh morning sun that painted the endless expanse of scrubland in shades of burnt orange and dusty brown. His weathered hands gripped the fence post he'd been repairing, knuckles white against the rough wood. At 32, he looked older. The war had seen to that. It had been 3 years since he'd returned from the battlefields back east. 3 years since he'd buried what was left of his heart in this God-forsaken stretch of land. The ranch wasn't much to look at. A modest wooden house with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and a well that threatened to run dry every summer. But it was his, bought with blood money and the remnants of his soldiers' pay. Elijah turned back toward the house, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Inside, on the kitchen table, lay the letter that would change everything. He'd read it a dozen times since it arrived 2 days ago, each word burning into his memory like a brand. Dear Mr. McRae, we are pleased to inform you that Miss Nora Whitfield has accepted your terms and will arrive at Redemption Creek Station on the 15th of September. Terms, that's what he'd called them in his advertisement. Not a proposal, not a courtship, terms, like a business contract, which, he supposed, it was. He needed someone to keep house, to maintain appearances in a town where bachelor ranchers were viewed with suspicion. She needed, well, he didn't know what she needed, but she'd agreed to his conditions. No physical relations, no expectations of love, just 2 people sharing a roof and the burden of survival in this unforgiving land. 500 miles away, in a cramped boarding house in Savannah, Georgia, Nora Whitfield folded her few belongings into a worn carpet bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped her mother's china teacup, the only thing of value she still possessed, in layers of petticoats. At 23, she should have been married with children by now, should have been tending to a proper home with lace curtains and a garden full of roses. Instead, she was preparing to journey west to marry a stranger who had made it clear he wanted nothing from her but her presence. You brought this on yourself, her father had said when he'd informed her of the arrangement. The smell of whiskey on his breath had been overwhelming, his eyes bloodshot from another night at the gambling tables. Should have married the Harrison boy when you had the chance. Now you'll take what you can get. What she could get was a man who promised not to touch her. In her current circumstances, it seemed like a blessing. The bruises from her father's last drunken rage had barely faded, purple and yellow marks hidden beneath her high collar. Perhaps a cold, distant husband was exactly what she needed. The train journey west was a blur of changing landscapes and sleepless nights. Nora watched through grimy windows as the gentle hills of Georgia gave way to the flat expanses of the prairie, then to the harsh, mountainous terrain of the frontier. Fellow passengers came and went, proper ladies with their husbands, rough men heading to the goldfields, families seeking new beginnings. She spoke to none of them, keeping her eyes downcast and her thoughts to herself. As the train chugged further west, the veneer of civilization gradually peeled away. The stations became fewer and farther between, the towns smaller and rougher. By the time she reached the last major stop before Redemption Creek, Nora felt as though she'd traveled not just across the country, but back in time to some primitive era. The final leg of the journey was by stagecoach, a bone-jarring ride that left her covered in dust and aching in every joint. She was the only passenger for the last 50 miles, bouncing around the interior like a marble in a box. The driver, a grizzled man who introduced himself only as Jeb, seemed to take perverse pleasure in hitting every rut and rock in the road. Redemption Creek, miss, he finally announced, pulling the horses to a stop in what appeared to be the middle of nowhere. End of the line. Nora peered out the window at the collection of weathered buildings that constituted the town. A general store, a saloon, a small church with a crooked steeple, and a handful of houses scattered like tumbleweeds across the dusty main street. This was to be her new home. She climbed down from the coach, her legs unsteady after days of travel. The sun beat down mercilessly. and she could feel perspiration gathering beneath her traveling dress. Jeb tossed her carpet bag down with little ceremony before climbing back onto his perch. "Ain't you waiting?" Nora asked, alarmed. My husband was supposed to meet me." Jeb spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "I got a schedule to keep. Miss, if he said he'd be here, he'll be here. If not—" He shrugged, snapped the reins, and the stagecoach lurched away, leaving Nora standing alone in the middle of the street with her bag at her feet. The few townspeople visible paid her little attention beyond curious glances. A woman swept the porch of the general store, pausing to stare before returning to her work. Two men lounging outside the saloon tipped their hats, but made no move to offer assistance. Nora waited. The sun climbed higher, and still she waited. Her dress grew damp with sweat. Her throat parched, finally, when shadows began to lengthen and her hopes had all but evaporated. She picked up her bag and walked to the general store. "Excuse me," she said to the woman behind the counter. "I'm looking for Mr. Elijah McRae. I'm his wife, his bride. I mean, we've corresponded." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "McRae? He lives out past Skeleton Ridge, good 15 miles from here." She looked Nora up and down, taking in her city clothes and pale complexion. "He didn't come to fetch you?" Heat flooded Nora's cheeks. There must have been some confusion about the date. The woman's expression suggested she thought otherwise. "Well, you can hire a wagon at the livery. Tom will take you out for $2. $2. It might as well have been 200. Nora had exactly 75 cents to her name, the last of her traveling money. She swallowed her pride. "Would it be possible that is, could someone send word to Mr. McRae that I've arrived?" The woman's face softened slightly. "I'll have my boy ride out in the morning. You can stay the night here. Got a room upstairs. $1, includes supper." Panic fluttered in Nora's chest. Thank you, but I really must reach the ranch today." "Perhaps I could walk, if you just point me in the right direction." "Walk? 15 miles through rough country?" The woman shook her head. "You'd be dead before you made it halfway. Snake bite, heat stroke, or worse." In the end, it was the woman's son, a gangly youth of about 16, who agreed to drive Nora to the McRae ranch for her 75 cents. The wagon was little more than a buckboard with no springs, and every bump sent jolts of pain through her already bruised body. The landscape grew increasingly desolate as they traveled, civilization falling away until there was nothing but rock, scrub brush, and endless sky. "That's it," the boy finally said, pointing to a collection of buildings huddled against a low rise. "McRae's place." Even from a distance, Nora could see the ranch's shabby appearance. Her heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral as the boy helped her down and handed over her bag. "You sure you'll be all right, miss?" he asked, glancing nervously at the house. "Mrs. McRae," Nora corrected softly. "And yes, I'll be fine. Thank you." She waited until the wagon disappeared over a rise before approaching the house. Her knock echoed hollowly. For a long moment, she feared no one would answer. Then the door opened, and she found herself face to face with her husband. Elijah McRae was not what she'd expected. Tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his sun-weathered skin. He stared at her for a moment, something flickering in his eyes. Surprise? Disappointment? Then his expression hardened into indifference. "You're late," he said flatly. "The 15th. Nora managed. "The letter said the 14th. He stepped aside to let her enter. "No matter. You're here now." The interior of the house was Spartan but clean. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a table with 2 chairs at the other. A narrow hallway led to what she assumed were bedrooms. Elijah picked up her bag without ceremony. "Your room's back here." He led her down the hall to a small chamber containing a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. "You'll find what you need. Privy's out back." wells beside the kitchen door. He set her bag on the floor and turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. "I don't expect anything from you beyond keeping house and cooking meals. Stay out of my way, and we'll get along fine." Then he was gone, leaving Nora alone in the small, bare room that was to be her new home. She sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd held back for so long to fall. They rolled down her cheeks silently, dropping onto her dusty traveling dress like rain on parched earth. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows and reminding her just how far from home she'd come. But home had never really been home. Had it, at least here, in this desolate place with this cold, scarred stranger. She might find some measure of peace, or so she desperately hoped. The first weeks at the McRae Ranch passed in a blur of silent meals and avoided glances. Elijah maintained his distance with the precision of a military campaign, rising before dawn to tend the horses and not returning until well after dark. When he did come in, he ate quickly and wordlessly at the table while Nora served him, then retreated to his room or sat by the fire cleaning his rifle, never acknowledging her presence beyond the occasional nod. Nora threw herself into the work of maintaining the household. The house, she discovered, had been neglected for far too long. Dust coated every surface. The windows were so grimy they barely let in light, and the kitchen cupboards harbored families of mice that scattered whenever she opened a door. She scrubbed and swept and organized with a desperate energy, as if by bringing order to this chaos, she might somehow make sense of her new life. The ranch itself was a study in hardship. The well water had to be hauled up bucket by bucket, leaving her arms aching and her hands raw. The vegetable garden behind the house was little more than a patch of withered stalks fighting a losing battle against the drought. When the wind blew, which was often, sand sifted through every crack in the walls, coating the floors she'd just cleaned and gritting between her teeth at meals. Some mornings, Nora would stand at the kitchen window and watch Elijah work with the horses in the corral. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his hands gentle despite their strength. The animals responded to him with trust, following him around the enclosure like oversized dogs. It was the only time she saw any softness in him, and even then, only from a distance. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. Days would pass without seeing another soul besides Elijah. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and trips to town were rare. Nora found herself talking to the chickens as she collected eggs, carrying on one-sided conversations just to hear a voice, even if it was only her own. 3 weeks into her new life, the first real cold snap hit. Nora woke shivering in her narrow bed, her breath visible in the frigid air. She dressed quickly in every layer she owned, but still the cold seeped through. In the kitchen, she found the water in the bucket frozen solid, a skin of ice forming on the wash basin. She managed to get a fire going in the stove, but the wood supply was running low. Wrapping herself in a thin shawl, the only one she owned, she ventured out to the woodpile behind the barn. The wind cut through her clothing like a knife, and her fingers were numb before she'd gathered half an armload. On the third trip, disaster struck. The ground, slick with frost, betrayed her. Nora's foot slipped, sending her tumbling hard onto the frozen earth. The wood scattered, and pain shot through her ankle. She tried to stand but gasped as the injured joint gave way beneath her. For several minutes she sat there in the bitter cold, fighting tears of frustration and pain. The house seemed impossibly far away. She began to crawl, dragging herself inch by painful inch across the frozen ground, when suddenly strong hands lifted her. Elijah carried her into the house without a word, his face a mask of controlled concern. He set her carefully in the chair by the fire and knelt to examine her ankle, his touch surprisingly gentle as he probed the swelling joint. "Not broken," he said finally. "Sprained badly, though." He fetched snow and a cloth to pack around the injury, then built up the fire until the room was almost warm. As Nora sat there, teeth chattering despite the heat, he disappeared into his room and returned with a heavy wool blanket that he draped around her shoulders. "You should have asked for help with the wood," he said, his voice holding a note she hadn't heard before. "You weren't here," Nora replied through chattering teeth. "And I didn't want to bother. Better bother than frozen to death." He turned away abruptly, busying himself at the stove. Soon the aroma of coffee filled the room, and he pressed a steaming mug into her hands. For the rest of that day and into the next, Elijah tended to her with a distant efficiency. He prepared simple meals, kept the fire burning, even helped her to her room when she needed to rest. But he spoke no more than necessary, and his eyes never quite met hers. As soon as her ankle improved enough for her to hobble about, he returned to his routine of absence, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. The incident seemed to have disturbed some delicate balance between them. Where before, Elijah had simply ignored her, now he seemed actively uncomfortable in her presence. He began taking his meals standing up by the stove, finishing quickly and escaping outdoors even in the bitter cold. Nora felt the rejection like a physical ache. She hadn't expected love or even kindness from this arrangement, but the complete indifference was harder to bear than she'd imagined. At night, she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind howl around the corners of the house and wondered if she'd exchanged one form of misery for another. A month after the injury, she reached her breaking point. The day had been particularly trying. The stove had smoked badly, filling the kitchen with acrid fumes. A coyote had gotten into the chicken coop and killed 2 of her best layers, and she'd burned the evening bread while trying to patch a hole in the roof that had begun leaking during the afternoon rain. When Elijah came in that evening, later than usual and covered in mud from some mishap with the cattle, he took one look at the smoky kitchen and blackened bread, and his jaw tightened. "I'll eat in the barn," he said curtly, grabbing a piece of dried meat from the pantry. Something inside Nora snapped. "Of course you will," she said, her voice trembling. "Heaven forbid you should have to endure my company for even the length of a meal." Elijah froze in the doorway, his back to her. "I know you didn't want a real wife," Nora continued, tears streaming down her face now. "I know I'm nothing but an inconvenience to you, but I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can to make this work, and you can't even look at me. You treat your horses with more warmth than you show me." Still, he didn't turn, didn't speak. Nora sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands as sobs shook her shoulders. She heard his footsteps, thought he was leaving, but then felt him stop beside her chair. When she looked up through her tears, he was staring down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You think this is easy for me?" His voice was low, rough. "You think I don't—" He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "This is how it has to be. It's better this way. For both of us." He left then, disappearing into the night. Nora sat alone in the smoky kitchen, wondering what he'd been about to say, what words he'd swallowed rather than speak aloud. The next morning, she found he'd fixed the stovepipe and patched the roof properly. A new load of firewood was stacked neatly by the door, and 2 replacement chickens pecked in the coop. No note, no acknowledgement, just the silent evidence of his attention. That evening, for the first time in weeks, he ate at the table. He still didn't speak, but when she served his plate, he nodded his thanks. And when she sat across from him with her own meal, he didn't flee. It wasn't much, but it was something. The fragile peace lasted 3 days. On the 4th evening, Elijah came in from the barn to find Nora sitting on the porch despite the cold, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. She'd received a letter that day, the first since her arrival, delivered by a passing traveler. The paper was crumpled in her lap. She didn't look up when he approached, didn't try to hide her tears. What was the point? He'd made it clear he wanted no part of her emotional life. But instead of walking past as she expected, Elijah stopped. He stood there for a long moment, and she could feel the weight of his gaze. Then, to her astonishment, he sat down beside her on the step, careful to maintain distance between them. "Bad news from home?" he asked quietly. Nora laughed bitterly. "My father, he's written to demand money, says since I'm married now, my husband can pay his debts." She crumpled the letter further. "I'm sorry. I know that wasn't part of our arrangement." You don't owe him anything, Elijah said firmly. Or me, for that matter. The debt doesn't transfer. They sat in silence as the sun set, painting the harsh landscape in softer shades of purple and gold. Finally, Elijah spoke again, so softly she almost missed it. My mother used to say tears were God's way of washing the soul clean. Never believed it myself, but he stood abruptly. Supper's getting cold. It was the longest conversation they'd had since her arrival, and Nora treasured each word like a gift. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought she heard him pacing in his room, the floorboards creaking under his restless steps. Whatever demons haunted Elijah McRae, they gave him no more peace than her own. Spring arrived slowly to Redemption Creek, fighting its way through the last bitter winds of winter. With it came a subtle shift in the McRae household. Elijah still maintained his careful distance, but the harsh edges had softened somewhat. He lingered a moment longer at meals, occasionally asked about supplies needed from town, and once, just once, she caught him almost smiling when she coaxed the stubbornest hen to finally lay eggs in the nesting box instead of random corners of the yard. It was during this tentative thaw that Nora made her request. "I'd like to learn to ride," she announced one morning as Elijah prepared to head out to check the fences. He paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Why?" "If something happens, if you're injured or the horses get loose, I should know how to handle them." She kept her voice steady, practical. It only makes sense. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he set down his cup with a deliberate care. "Tomorrow. Dawn. Wear something you can move in." The next morning, Nora stood nervously beside the corral as Elijah led out a mare named Buttercup, the gentlest of his small herd. He showed her how to approach the animal, how to let the horse catch her scent, where to place her hands. "Never come at them straight on," he instructed, his voice taking on the patient tone he used with the animals. "They can't see directly in front. Come from the side. Let them know you're there." The first lesson was a disaster. Nora, trying to mount as he'd shown her, got her skirt tangled and nearly fell. The second attempt wasn't much better. By the third, Elijah's jaw was tight with barely suppressed frustration. "Perhaps this was a mistake," Nora said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "No." The word came out sharper than he'd apparently intended. He took a breath, seemed to gather himself. "No, you're thinking too much. Feel the rhythm. Don't fight it." He helped her mount again, his hands steady on her waist as she swung into the saddle. For just a moment, they were close enough that she could smell the soap he used, see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Then he stepped back quickly, as if burned. The lessons continued every other dawn, slowly, painfully. Nora learned to move with the horse instead of against it, to guide with her knees and trust the animal's instincts. Elijah was a demanding teacher, but a fair one, pushing her just enough without overwhelming her. It was during the fourth week of lessons that everything changed. They'd ridden out farther than usual, following a deer trail that wound through a cluster of cottonwoods. The morning was perfect, cool but not cold, with a breeze that carried the scent of sage and new grass. Nora had finally found her confidence in the saddle, and for the first time, she felt something like joy as they moved across the landscape. Then Buttercup reared. The snake, a rattler sunning itself on a flat rock, buzzed its warning too late. The mare's front hooves pawed the air as she tried to wheel away from danger. Nora, caught off guard, felt herself sliding backward, her hands grasping uselessly at the reins. She would have fallen, should have fallen, but suddenly Elijah was there. He dismounted his own horse in one fluid motion and caught her as she tumbled from the saddle. The momentum sent them both to the ground, Elijah taking the brunt of the impact with Nora landing on top of him. For a breathless moment, they stayed frozen. Nora could feel his heart hammering against her palm where it pressed against his chest, could see her own shock reflected in his widened eyes. His arms were wrapped around her protectively, one hand cradling the back of her head. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. "No, The words died as their eyes met. Something shifted in his expression. a crack in the careful walls he'd built. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she saw him swallow hard. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Nora felt herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than reason. His hand tightened slightly in her hair, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes, want battling against will. Then a horse snorted nearby, breaking the spell. Elijah released her as if she were on fire, scrambling to his feet and turning away. His breathing was uneven, his shoulders rigid with tension. "We should head back," he said without looking at her. "Check that Buttercup didn't injure herself." The ride home was excruciating. Elijah led Buttercup while Nora rode his mount, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. When they reached the ranch, he took both horses to the barn without a word, leaving Nora standing in the yard feeling bereft and confused. He didn't come in for the midday meal, or for supper. When darkness fell with no sign of him, Nora wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and ventured to the barn. She found him there, brushing down a horse that already gleamed from attention. "You can't avoid me forever," she said softly. His hand stilled on the horse's flank. "I'm not avoiding you." "No? Then why won't you look at me?" He did turn then, and the raw pain in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because when I look at you, I want things I have no right to want, things I swore I'd never want again. Elijah, no." He turned back to the horse. "This is how it has to be. I told you from the beginning." "You told me you wouldn't touch me," Nora interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "You never said anything about not wanting to." The brush clattered to the floor. Elijah braced his hands against the stall door, his knuckles white. "Want?" He laughed bitterly. "You think this is about want? Every night I lie awake knowing you're just down the hall. Every morning I watch you move around my kitchen like you belong there. And every damn day I remind myself why we can't. Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "What are you so afraid of?" He was across the barn in 3 strides, stopping just inches from her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I'm broken. Nora, the war. What happened after? It broke something in me that can't be fixed. You deserve better than what's left." Without thinking, Nora raised her hand to the scar on his face, tracing it gently with her fingertips. He flinched but didn't pull away. "We're all broken in some way," she said quietly. "Maybe that's why we fit." For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. His eyes darkened, and he swayed toward her almost imperceptibly. Then, with what seemed like superhuman effort, he stepped back. "Don't," he said hoarsely. "Please, just don't." He left the barn, and this time, Nora didn't follow. She stood there in the lamplight, her hand still tingling from the touch of his scarred skin, and wondered if wanting someone who was determined not to be wanted was its own special kind of heartbreak. The next morning, Elijah was gone before she woke. He'd left a note on the kitchen table. Gone to town for supplies, back late. But she knew he wasn't really going for supplies. He was running from her, from whatever had almost happened between them in the barn. That evening, as she prepared a meal he probably wouldn't eat, Nora caught sight of her reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who'd arrived at this ranch months ago. Harder in some ways, worn by the harsh life, but also stronger. She'd survived her father's cruelty, survived the journey west, survived Elijah's cold indifference. She could survive this too. But as night fell with no sign of his return, Nora sat by the window watching the road and admitted a truth she'd been avoiding. She didn't want to just survive anymore. For the first time in her life, she wanted more. She wanted the man who handled horses with gentle strength, who fixed things without being asked, who looked at her like she was both salvation and damnation. She wanted Elijah McRae, and that wanting might be the thing that finally broke them both. The days following the incident in the barn were marked by a careful choreography of avoidance. Elijah returned to his pattern of absence, but now Nora understood it differently. Where she'd once seen indifference, she now recognized self-imposed exile. The knowledge didn't make it easier to bear, but it changed something fundamental in how she viewed their strange marriage. It was while cleaning the spare room, a task she'd put off for months, that Nora made her discovery. Behind a stack of old horse blankets, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, was a leather journal. She shouldn't have opened it. She knew that even as her fingers worked at the knots, but loneliness and curiosity won over propriety. The first page bore Elijah's name and a date from 5 years prior. The handwriting was neater than she'd expected, the words flowing across the page in careful lines. April 15th, 1871. They say writing helps. Doc Miller swears by it, says it'll help with the nightmares, the shaking. I told him nothing helps with that but whiskey, and I'm trying not to go down that road. So, here I am, writing to no one about things I can't say aloud. Nora sank onto the dusty floor, the journal heavy in her lap. She turned the page. April 20th, 1871. The dreams are getting worse. Last night I was back at Antietam. Could smell the powder smoke, the blood. Woke up screaming Sarah's name. Haven't done that in months. Maybe because the anniversary is coming up. 2 years since she left, since she looked at this face and couldn't hide her disgust. Sarah. The name hit Nora like a physical blow. She knew she should stop reading, but her eyes were already moving to the next entry. May 3rd, 1871. Saw Sarah in town today with her new husband. She's with child. Looked happy, looked whole. Everything I couldn't give her. When she saw me, she crossed the street to avoid passing close. Can't say I blame her. Who wants to be reminded of broken promises and ruined faces? Page after page revealed the depth of Elijah's wounds. Not just the physical scar that marked his face, but the deeper damage to his spirit. Sarah had been his fiancée before the war. She'd waited for him, written letters full of love and promises. But when he'd returned, scarred and haunted, she'd tried to honor their engagement for exactly 3 months before returning his ring. August 12th, 1871. The scar is fading some, Doc says. Doesn't matter. The real damage isn't something you can see. It's the nights I wake up trying to claw my way out of a grave that isn't there. It's the way my hands shake when I hear sudden noises. It's the anger that comes from nowhere, making me want to break things just to feel something besides empty. Sarah was right to leave. I'm not fit for decent company, not fit to be anyone's husband. Nora's eyes burned with unshed tears. She understood now why he'd advertised for a wife he'd never touch, why he'd been so specific in his requirements. He wanted the protection marriage offered from gossips and matchmakers, but believed himself too damaged to be a real husband. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. What are you doing? Elijah stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. Nora scrambled to her feet, the journal clutched against her chest. I was cleaning and I found... You found something private and decided to help yourself. His voice was deadly quiet. Give it to me. Elijah, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have... Give it to me. She held out the journal with trembling hands. He snatched it from her, his jaw working as he fought for control. Get out. Please, let me explain. Get out. The words exploded from him with such force that Nora flinched. She fled the room, fled the house entirely, not stopping until she reached the well. There she sank down onto the rough wooden platform and finally let the tears fall. The sun was setting by the time she gathered the courage to return to the house. She found Elijah sitting at the kitchen table, the journal open before him, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his elbow. He didn't look up when she entered. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I had no right. He took another drink, still not meeting her eyes. Now you know why I keep my distance. Why I warned you from the start. Nora moved closer, stopping just out of reach. What I know is that you're a man who's been hurt, who lost someone he loved and blames himself for it. Elijah laughed bitterly. Lost someone? She took one look at this. He gestured to his scarred face, and couldn't get away fast enough. And she was right. I came back wrong. Nora, broken in ways that can't be fixed. You're not broken, Nora said firmly. You're wounded. There's a difference. Is there? He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. Do you know what I dream about? Dead men, mountains of them. Boys I killed, boys I couldn't save. I wake up smelling blood and gunpowder. Sometimes I forget where I am, think I'm still there. He took another drink. Sarah saw that, saw me wake up screaming, saw me put my fist through a wall because a door slammed. She was smart to run. Nora thought of her own nightmares, of flinching every time she'd heard heavy footsteps, of the bruises she'd hidden for so long. We all have our demons. Elijah, that doesn't make us unworthy of love. Don't, his voice was raw. Don't look at me like that, like I'm something worth saving. Why not? She moved closer still, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. Why is it so hard to believe that someone might see past the scars to the man underneath? Because there's nothing underneath. He slammed his hand on the table, making the bottle jump. What you see is all there is. A scarred, angry man who can barely make it through a day without wanting to crawl out of his own skin. Nora reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his. What I see is a man who tends horses with infinite patience, who fixes things without being asked, who carried me in from the cold and sat by my bed when I was sick, who built me a better chicken coop because he noticed I was having trouble with the latch. Elijah stared at their joined hands as if he'd never seen such a thing before. That doesn't make up for the rest. The rest? Nora squeezed his hand gently. You mean the nightmares, the anger, the pain you carry. Those aren't character flaws. Elijah, they're battle scars, just like the one on your face. He pulled his hand away and stood abruptly, moving to the window. You don't understand. Sarah. I'm not Sarah, Nora interrupted. I'm not some untouched girl with romantic notions about war heroes. I know what violence does to a person. I know what it's like to live in fear, to have your body remember trauma your mind tries to forget. Elijah turned slowly. What are you saying? Nora took a shaky breath. My father started drinking when my mother died. Started gambling too. And when he lost, which was often, he'd come home and... She touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering old pain. I learned to read his moods, to make myself scarce when the rage was building. But sometimes there was nowhere to hide. The anger drained from Elijah's face, replaced by something softer. Nora? So you see, she continued, forcing her voice to remain steady. I'm not running from your scars. I'm not afraid of your darkness, because I have my own. They stood there in the gathering twilight, two damaged souls recognizing each other across the battlefield of their kitchen. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice rough with emotion. That first night, he said slowly, when you arrived, you were crying. I heard you through the wall. Wanted to... He paused, seeming to search for words. I wanted to comfort you, but I didn't know how. Didn't trust myself to... And now? Nora asked softly. He met her eyes, and she saw the war still raging there. Hope battling fear. Desire fighting duty. Now I want things I promised I wouldn't want. Feel things I swore I'd never feel again. He laughed shakily. You've ruined everything. You know that? All my careful plans, all my walls. You've torn through them like they were paper. Good, Nora said firmly. Those walls were killing you slowly. Maybe, he admitted, but they were keeping you safe. Safe from what? From knowing the man I married has a heart? From discovering he's capable of tenderness despite his pain? She moved toward him slowly. I don't want to be safe from that. Elijah, I want to know you. All of you. The good and the bad. The light and the dark. He watched her approach with the wariness of a wild animal, but he didn't retreat. When she stopped just inches away, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat, he whispered, I don't know how to do this anymore. How to be close to someone. Then we'll learn together. Nora said simply, one day at a time, one moment at a time. She reached up slowly, telegraphing her intent, and placed her palm against his scarred cheek. He closed his eyes, leaning into the touch as if starved for it. When he opened them again, she saw surrender there. "I'm going to hurt you," he said, his voice barely audible. "Not on purpose, but I'm going to have bad days, dark days, days when the war feels more real than the present. And I'm going to have days when I flinch at nothing," Nora replied. "Days when the past creeps in. We'll weather them together." He covered her hand with his, pressing it more firmly against his face. "Together," he repeated, as if testing the word. Then, with infinite care, he lowered his head until his forehead rested against hers. "God help me, Nora. I want to try, but I'm terrified." "So am I," she admitted. "But I think maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared together is better than being safe alone." They stayed that way as full darkness fell, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, two wounded hearts beginning the slow, careful work of healing. The fragile peace between them lasted exactly 1 week before the world intruded. Hank Garrett rode into their lives on a Tuesday afternoon, trailing dust and danger like a second shadow. Nora was hanging laundry when she spotted the rider approaching, a broad-shouldered man on a paint horse, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd never met trouble he couldn't handle or create. She felt Elijah tense beside her before she'd even registered his presence. He'd been helping her with the heavy quilts, a new development in their careful dance toward intimacy. Now he stepped slightly in front of her, his hand moving instinctively toward where his gun belt would hang if he'd been wearing it. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Elijah, now, Nora." Something in his voice made her obey without further question. She gathered her skirts and moved toward the house, but positioned herself at the window where she could watch. The rider drew up just outside their fence line, making no move to dismount. Well, Elijah McRae. Been a long time. Not long enough, Hank." Elijah's voice was flat, controlled. "State your business or move on." Hank's laugh was unpleasant. "That any way to greet an old friend? We rode together, fought together. That used to mean something. That was a different life. I'm not that man anymore." "No?" Hank's gaze swept over the tidy yard. The mended fence, the curtains Nora had hung in the windows. "Gone respectable. Have you? Even got yourself a woman, from the look of things." Elijah said nothing, but Nora could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his weight shifted to the balls of his feet. "Thing is," Hank continued, leaning forward in his saddle, "you still owe me, McRae. That last job in Kansas, you left before the split. I figure your share, with interest, comes to about $300. That money was blood money. I didn't want it then. Don't owe it now." "See, that's where you're wrong." Hank's friendly tone vanished like smoke. "You were part of the crew. You take the good with the bad, and if you can't pay in cash, well." His eyes drifted toward the house, where Nora's silhouette was visible in the window. "I'm sure we can work something out." Elijah moved faster than thought. One moment he was standing still. The next, he had his hand wrapped around Hank's boot, nearly yanking him from the saddle. "You look at her again. You think about her again, and I'll kill you where you stand." Hank jerked free, his horse dancing nervously. "Threatening me? McRae? That's not very respectable." He straightened his coat with exaggerated care. "You've got 2 weeks to come up with the money. After that, I'll take payment however I can get it." He wheeled his horse around and galloped off, leaving a cloud of dust and dread in his wake. Elijah stood frozen for a long moment after Hank disappeared over the ridge. When he finally turned toward the house, his face was carved from stone. He brushed past Nora without a word, heading for his room. "Elijah, wait. Pack your things." He didn't stop moving. "I'll take you to town in the morning. The stage runs on Thursdays. I'll give you money for passage back east." "What?" Nora followed him down the hall. "Elijah, stop. Talk to me." He spun around so suddenly she nearly ran into him. There's nothing to talk about. This is my mess, my past. You don't need to be part of it. I'm already part of it. I'm your wife. On paper, he said harshly. That's all. A convenience. And now it's no longer convenient. The words stung. But Nora had learned to see past Elijah's defensive strikes. Who was that man? Someone I used to know. During the war. After... He turned away again, but she caught his arm. Please, I deserve to know what kind of danger we're facing. Elijah laughed bitterly. We? There is no we in this. Nora, this is my burden. That's not how marriage works. Our marriage isn't supposed to work. The words exploded from him. It was supposed to be simple, clean. You cook and clean. I provide shelter. No complications. No feelings. He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. But then you had to go and what? Nora challenged. Care about you? Refuse to run when things get difficult? Yes. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes wild. Don't you understand? Men like Hank don't make idle threats. He'll hurt you to get to me. His voice broke. I can't watch that happen. Not again. Again. Elijah released her, stumbling back. There was a woman in Kansas. Maria. She ran the boarding house where we stayed. She was kind to me, patched me up after a fight. Hank noticed. When I refused to ride with them anymore, when I tried to leave that life, he swallowed hard. They burned her boarding house down. She survived, but barely. Lost everything because she showed me kindness. Nora's heart ached for him, for the guilt he carried like another scar. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I knew what they were capable of. I should have stayed away from her, just like I should have stayed away from you. But you didn't, Nora said softly. And I'm glad. Whatever happens, I'm glad. That seemed to break something in him. He sagged against the wall, suddenly looking older than his years. $300. Might as well be $3,000. I've got maybe 50 saved, and the horses aren't worth enough to make up the difference. We'll figure something out. Stop saying we, he said wearily. This isn't your fight. You're right, Nora said. It's not my fight. It's ours. That's what you don't seem to understand, Elijah. When I spoke those vows, when I promised for better or worse, I meant it, even if you didn't. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw wonder mix with the fear in his eyes. Why? He asked. Why would you stand by me? You could leave, start over somewhere safe. Because, Nora said simply, I'd rather face danger with you than safety without you. The next days were tense with preparation. Elijah rode to neighboring ranches, trying to find work or buyers for what little they could spare. Nora took inventory of everything they owned, looking for anything of value. The silver candlesticks from his mother, pawned. The extra saddle, sold. Still, they were woefully short. 3 nights before Hank's deadline, Nora found Elijah teaching her to shoot with grim determination. Elbow locked, he instructed, standing behind her as she aimed at a row of bottles he'd set on the fence. Don't jerk the trigger, squeeze it gentle-like. The gun was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold despite the warm evening. She could feel Elijah's solid presence at her back, his hand steadying her arm. Why are you teaching me this? She asked, though she suspected she knew. Because if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. His laugh was humorless. Your faith is touching, but misplaced. Hank's faster than me on his worst day. If it comes to shooting, then we'll find another way. She lowered the gun, turning in his arms to face him. There has to be another way. They were so close she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could feel his breath on her face. The sunset painted everything in shades of rose and amber, softening the harsh landscape and the harder truth of their situation. Nora, he said, her name a prayer and a plea. She rose on her toes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other might bolt. Then Elijah made a sound deep in his throat and pulled her closer. the gun forgotten as it dropped to the dirt, his hands tangled in her hair, loosening the pins she'd so carefully placed that morning. She could taste desperation on his lips, feel the tremor that ran through him as she pressed closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is why you should go," he said raggedly. "Because I can't think straight when you're near, can't plan, can't strategize. All I can think about is Elijah." She placed her fingers against his lips. "Stop trying to save me from you. I don't want to be saved." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You beautiful, stubborn fool. Don't you know I'd die before I let him hurt you?" "Then don't die," she said fiercely. "Live, fight, stay with me." He kissed her again, harder this time, with an edge of desperation that made her heart race. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. "Teach you to shoot tomorrow," he said roughly. "Right now." Right now. There was just them in the fading light and the knowledge that time was running out. They stood there in the gathering dusk, holding each other like they could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. But somewhere out there, Hank Garrett was waiting. And in 2 days, their fragile peace would shatter like glass. The morning of the deadline dawned gray and cold, with clouds hanging low over the mountains like a shroud. Elijah had been gone since before sunrise, riding to town in a last desperate attempt to secure a loan. He'd left Nora with strict instructions to bar the door and keep the rifle close. She tried to busy herself with chores, but her hands shook as she kneaded bread. And she jumped at every sound. The old house seemed to creak more than usual, each groan of wood making her heart race. By noon, with no sign of Elijah, her nerves were stretched to breaking. When she heard horses approaching, she grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. Her relief at seeing Elijah's familiar form quickly turned to dread when she realized he wasn't alone. 2 riders flanked him, and even from a distance, she could see the defeat in the set of his shoulders. He dismounted slowly, said something to the men, then walked toward the house. Nora met him at the door. "I couldn't get it all," he said without preamble. "200 is all I could manage. Thompson at the bank said my land's not worth enough to secure more. Maybe if we explain—" "Men like Hank don't accept explanations." He cupped her face gently. "I need you to stay inside. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, promise me you'll stay inside. Elijah, promise me." She saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate need to believe she'd be safe, and couldn't deny him. "I promise." He kissed her then, fierce and quick, before turning back to face whatever came next. Hank Garrett arrived as the sun reached its zenith, bringing with him 3 more men. They spread out in a semicircle, effectively surrounding the front of the house. Nora watched from behind the curtain as Elijah walked out to meet them, his stride steady despite everything. "McRae." Hank dismounted with theatrical ease. "You got my money?" 200. Elijah held out a leather pouch. "It's all I could raise." Hank hefted the pouch, then tossed it to one of his men without counting it. "That's unfortunate. We agreed on 300. It's more than fair for a debt I never owed." "Fair?" Hank laughed. "When has life ever been fair? You rode with us. You benefited from our work. That makes you liable for your share. I never took a cent from those raids. Your choice doesn't change the debt." Hank's eyes drifted toward the house. "Though I'm thinking maybe we can work out alternate payment." "That pretty little wife of yours." The words were barely out before Elijah's fist connected with Hank's jaw. The larger man stumbled back, more surprised than hurt, while his men went for their guns. "Hold!" Hank spat blood, then grinned. "Still got that temper, eh, McRae? Good. Makes this more interesting." He straightened, rubbing his jaw. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get me that last 100 by week's end, or I'm going to take it out in trade, and I don't mean horses. You come near her, you'll what? Kill me? Fight all 4 of us?" Hank shook his head. "You've gone soft. McRae, domestic life has made you weak. Week's end, after that, I take what I'm owed however I please." They mounted up and rode off. leaving Elijah standing alone in the yard. Nora burst from the house the moment they were out of sight. "A week," she said. "That gives us time. To what? Perform miracles?" Elijah's control finally cracked. He slammed his fist into the fence post, splitting his knuckles. "I've got nothing left to sell, nowhere left to borrow from. I've failed you." "You haven't failed anyone." Nora caught his injured hand, cradling it gently. "Come inside. Let me tend to this." In the kitchen, she cleaned his knuckles with careful efficiency, trying not to think about how familiar this felt, patching up damage done in anger and frustration. But this was different. Elijah's rage wasn't directed at her, but at himself, at circumstances beyond his control. "There has to be something," she murmured, wrapping his hand with clean cloth. "Something we haven't thought of." "There's nothing." He caught her hand as she finished tying off the bandage. "Nora, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. I'm going to give you what money I have left. Tomorrow, you're going to town. You're going to get on that stage, and you're going to—" "Stop!" She pulled her hand free. "Just stop. I'm not leaving. Damn it, woman. This isn't a game. These men will—" He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "Will what? Hurt me? Kill me?" Nora met his eyes steadily. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I'm some naive child who doesn't understand the danger? Then why? Because I love you, you stubborn fool." The words hung in the air between them like a living thing. Elijah went absolutely still, his face a study in shock. Nora felt heat flood her cheeks but didn't look away. "I love you," she repeated, softer this time. "I love your grumpy morning silences and the way you talk to the horses when you think I'm not listening. I love how you pretend not to care but fix things before I even ask. I love your stupid, noble attempts to protect me from yourself." Her voice cracked. "And if you think I'm going to run away and leave you to face this alone, then you don't know me at all." "Nora," his voice was raw. "You can't love me. I'm broken. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her frustration and fear and determination into it. When she pulled back, his eyes were wet. "You're the man I choose," she said firmly. "Today. Tomorrow. Always. So stop trying to make that choice for me." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she might disappear. "I don't deserve you," he whispered into her hair. "Probably not." She agreed, earning a surprised laugh. "But you're stuck with me anyway." They spent the rest of the day planning, looking for any possible solution. As night fell, exhausted and no closer to an answer, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "I've been thinking," Nora said quietly, "about that boarding house woman, Maria." Elijah tensed. "What about her? You said they burned her out because she showed you kindness, but that wasn't really why, was it? They burned her out because you left, because you chose to be better than what they wanted you to be. The result was the same." "No," Nora said firmly. "The result was that you got away. You built a life, however imperfect. You chose to be more than your worst moments." She turned to face him. "That's not something to regret. That's something to be proud of." He was quiet for a long moment. "How do you do that?" he finally asked. "How do you see good where there is none?" "Because I'm looking at you, not your past." She leaned into his warmth. "We all have things we're running from. Elijah, the difference is, you're trying to run towards something better. That's what I fell in love with. Not the perfect man you think you should be, but the imperfect one you are. Even if that imperfect man gets you killed?" "He won't," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Because he's too stubborn to let that happen." That night, for the first time since their marriage, they shared a bed. Not in passion, though the want was there, simmering beneath the surface, but in comfort. Elijah held her as if she were made of spun glass. His body curved protectively around hers. "I love you too," he whispered in the darkness. "God help me, I tried not to, but I do." "I know," she whispered back. "Took you long enough to admit it." His quiet laughter rumbled through his chest. "Stubborn to the end. We're well matched then." They lay awake most of the night, memorizing the feeling of being together, neither willing to waste a moment on sleep, because in the morning, their week of borrowed time would begin, and they both knew it might not be enough. But for now, in the quiet darkness of their room, they had each other. And somehow, that made even the impossible seem worth fighting for. The week passed in a blur of desperate activity. Elijah rode out each day, trying to find work, buyers, anything that might bring in the needed money. Nora took in mending from town, her fingers working until they bled. But the few coins it earned were drops in an empty bucket. By the 6th day, they had managed to scrape together only $20 more. On the final morning, Elijah stood at the window watching the road, his jaw set in grim determination. He'd cleaned his rifle, checked his revolver, and made his peace with what was coming. "Don't look at me like that," he said without turning. "I'm not planning anything foolish. Aren't you?" Nora moved to stand beside him. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're preparing for war. Sometimes war comes whether you're prepared or not." He finally looked at her, and she saw resignation in his eyes. "I won't let them take you. Nora, whatever happens today, I need you to know that." Before she could respond, dust appeared on the horizon, but instead of Hank's gang, a lone rider approached. As the figure drew closer, Nora recognized Tom, the general store owner's son. "Mrs. McRae!" The boy was breathless as he reined in his horse. "Ma sent me to fetch you. Says it's urgent. Something about that man who was asking after you yesterday." Elijah's hand went to his gun. "What man?" "Older fella, fancy clothes. Said he was looking for a Nora Whitfield. Ma told him you were Nora McRae now. Living out here? He seemed real shocked by that news." Nora's blood ran cold. "Did he give a name?" "Whitfield, ma'am. Said he was your father." The words hit her like a physical blow. After all these months, after thinking herself free, her past had found her. She gripped Elijah's arm for support. "Tell your mother we'll be there within the hour," Elijah said. The boy nodded and rode off. "I can't," Nora whispered. "If he's here, if he's found me—" "Hey," Elijah caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Look at me. He can't hurt you anymore. I won't let him. You don't understand. He'll say I'm not legally married, that I'm still his property. He'll do nothing." Elijah's voice was steel. "You're my wife. That makes you under my protection, and I'll kill any man who says otherwise." They rode to town together. Nora pressed close against Elijah's back, drawing strength from his solid presence. The general store was busier than usual, townspeople having gathered to witness whatever drama was unfolding. Samuel Whitfield stood on the store's porch like he owned it, his city clothes and polished boots marking him as an outsider. When he saw Nora, his face contorted with fury. "There you are, you ungrateful chit. Thought you could run off and leave your debts behind? I owe you nothing." Nora was proud that her voice didn't shake. "Nothing. I fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me? By selling yourself to some scarred savage in the wilderness?" Elijah dismounted first, then helped Nora down, keeping himself between her and her father. "Watch your tongue, old man." Samuel's eyes narrowed as he took in Elijah's scarred face and worn clothes. "So you're the one who bought my daughter. Hope you didn't pay much. She's more trouble than she's worth." "I didn't buy her," Elijah said evenly. "I married her. Without my permission, that makes it invalid. She's of age. Your permission wasn't required." Samuel's face flushed. "She's still my daughter, my property until properly married off, and since I didn't approve this match, the law says otherwise." A new voice interrupted. Judge Harper, the circuit judge who happened to be in town, stepped forward. "A woman over 21 can marry without parental consent. I should know. I wrote the territorial statute myself." "But she stole from me," Samuel sputtered. "Ran off in the night with money and goods that belonged to me." "What money?" Nora found her voice. "The 75 cents I saved from taking in mending. The dress I wore that I'd sewn myself from fabric I earned. You ungrateful—" Samuel raised his hand as if to strike her. He never got the chance. Elijah caught his wrist mid-swing, his grip crushing. "Touch her, and it'll be the last thing you ever do." "You're threatening me? In front of witnesses?" Samuel tried to wrench free. "I'll have you arrested." "Try it." Elijah released him with a shove that sent the older man stumbling. "But first, tell everyone here about the gambling debts. Tell them why you really want your daughter back, because you already promised her to one of your creditors." Samuel's face went pale. "How did you—" "Your letter," Nora said quietly. "You were foolish enough to put it in writing. How you'd promised me to Mr. Garrison to clear your debt. How I was to be his compensation for the $1,000 you owed." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Selling daughters to pay debts might happen, but it wasn't something decent folks approved of. "That's different," Samuel blustered. "Garrison's a respectable man. He would have married you proper. After he'd already had 3 wives die under mysterious circumstances?" Nora stepped out from behind Elijah. "I know why you chose him. Father, because you knew he'd pay well for a young wife he could use up quickly." The crowd's murmurs turned darker. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner, moved to stand beside Nora. "That true, Mr. Whitfield? You are selling your daughter to a known wife killer." "It's not selling. It's arranging a marriage." "It's selling," Judge Harper said flatly. "And it's illegal in this territory. Mrs. McRae, do you wish to press charges?" Nora looked at her father, really looked at him. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished. Just a desperate, pathetic man who'd gambled away everything, including his soul. "No," she said finally. "I just want him gone. You can't just—" Samuel started. "Yes, she can." Elijah stepped forward. "You've got 2 choices. Whitfield, leave now, on your own feet, and never come near my wife again. Or stay and face charges for attempted trafficking. Your choice." Samuel looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him. Whatever he'd expected to find here, it wasn't this. A community protecting one of their own. "This isn't over," he spat. "You think you've won, but it is over." Nora's voice was steady now. "I'm not your daughter anymore. I'm not your property. I'm Elijah McRae's wife, and this is my home. You have no power here." For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other across an unbridgeable gulf. Then Samuel Whitfield turned and stalked to his rented horse. "You'll regret this," he called as he mounted. "When he shows his true nature, when he breaks you like all men break their women, you'll wish you'd listened to me." "The only thing I regret," Nora called back, "is not leaving sooner." They watched him ride away, the crowd gradually dispersing as the drama ended. But just as Nora began to relax, thinking one threat had passed, she spotted riders approaching from the opposite direction. Hank Garrett and his men, coming to collect. Elijah saw them too. "Into the store," he ordered. "Now! We're closed." "Mrs." Henderson announced loudly, ushering people inside. "Everyone inside! Quick now!" The townspeople, sensing new danger, scrambled for cover. Within moments, the street was empty except for Elijah, standing alone in the dusty main road. "McRae!" Hank's voice carried clearly. "Time's up. Go home. Hank, that debt's been settled." "With 200 short?" "I don't think so." Hank and his 3 men spread out, hands hovering near their guns. "Though after the show I just witnessed, I'm thinking there might be better payment than money. Your wife handled her daddy pretty well. Let's see how she handles real men." Inside the store, Nora pressed against the window. Judge Harper caught her arm. "Don't go out there, child. Let the men handle this." "He is handling it," Nora said. "But he doesn't have to do it alone." She grabbed the shotgun, Mrs. Henderson kept behind the counter, checked the loads, and headed for the door. "Mrs. McRae, no!" several voices called. But Nora was already stepping onto the porch, the shotgun steady in her hands. "That's far enough, Mr. Garrett," Hank's men laughed. "Look at that. Boys, little woman thinks she can shoot." "I know I can shoot," Nora said calmly. "My husband taught me. Want to find out how well?" "This isn't your fight, woman," Hank growled. Wrong. She moved to stand beside Elijah. Everything that concerns my husband concerns me. That's what marriage means. Nora, get back inside, Elijah said through gritted teeth. No? She kept the shotgun trained on Hank. We faced this together, remember? For a moment, the street was silent except for the wind. Then Judge Harper stepped onto the porch, followed by Tom Henderson with a rifle, and old Mr. Thompson from the bank. Seems like you're outnumbered, Garrett. The judge observed. Maybe it's time to reconsider. One by one, more townspeople emerged, armed and ready. The community that had embraced Nora was now standing with her and Elijah against the threat. Hank's eyes darted between the growing crowd and Elijah. This isn't over. McRae. Yes, Elijah said quietly. It is. You're going to ride out of here and never come back, because next time, I won't wait for you to draw first. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then Hank spat in the dust. This town ain't worth the trouble anyway. Come on, boys. They wheeled their horses and galloped away, dust rising in their wake. Only when they disappeared over the ridge did Nora lower the shotgun, her hands finally beginning to shake. Elijah caught her as her knees buckled, holding her tight against him. You magnificent, foolish woman, he murmured. What were you thinking? I was thinking, she said shakily, that you don't have to face your demons alone anymore. That's what you have me for. He kissed her then, right there in the middle of Main Street, in front of God and everyone. The crowd cheered, and someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, wiped away tears. When they finally pulled apart, Judge Harper cleared his throat. Well now, that was quite a day's excitement. Mrs. McRae, Mr. McRae, I believe congratulations are in order, both for your courage and for what appears to be a marriage that's stronger than most. As the sun set over Redemption Creek, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Elijah and Nora stood surrounded by their community. They'd faced down the past, stood together against threats, and discovered that home wasn't just a place. It was the people willing to stand with you when trouble came calling. The demons might return someday. The past might rear its head again. But for now, they were free. They were together. And they were home. 5 years had passed since that day on Main Street, and the McRae Ranch had transformed. Where once stood a weathered house with a sagging porch, now rose a proper home with fresh paint and new shutters. The garden Nora had coaxed from the reluctant soil bloomed with vegetables and herbs, while climbing roses started from cuttings Mrs. Henderson had shared, wound their way up the porch posts. Elijah stood at the fence line, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The landscape hadn't changed much, still harsh, still demanding, but his eyes saw it differently now. Where once he'd seen only isolation and punishment, now he saw possibility and peace. Papa! Papa! A small voice called from the house. Mama says supper's ready. He turned to see his daughter, 4-year-old Rose, running toward him with the fearless abandon of childhood. Her dark hair, so like his, streamed behind her as she ran, her mother's green eyes bright with excitement. Is that so? He scooped her up, settling her on his shoulders. And what has Mama made for us tonight? Stew and bread and pie. Rose bounced with each word, her small hands gripping his hair for balance. Pie must be a special occasion. It is, Nora said from the porch, one hand resting on her rounded belly. But you'll have to come inside to find out why. Even after all these years, the sight of her could still stop his breath. She'd bloomed in this harsh land, growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing season. The tentative woman who'd arrived on that dusty stagecoach had become a force of nature, as much a part of this land now as the mountains themselves. Inside, the table was set with their best dishes, the china Nora's mother had left her, carefully glued back together after its journey west. Candles flickered in the silver holders they'd reclaimed from pawn, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. What's all this? Elijah asked, setting Rose in her chair. Nora smiled mysteriously. We have news to share, but first, tell her what you did today. Rose. The little girl practically vibrated with excitement. I helped teach letters to Jimmy Henderson and the Murphy twins, and even grumpy old Mr. Sawyer. She did wonderfully, Nora confirmed. Even got Sawyer to admit he'd been signing his name wrong all these years. The school had been Nora's idea. Started 3 years ago in their barn. What began as teaching a few local children their letters had grown into a proper educational endeavor. They'd even received books donated from churches back east, and talk was beginning about building a real schoolhouse in town. Speaking of the school, Nora said, serving the stew. Judge Harper stopped by today. The Territorial Board of Education has approved our petition. Elijah paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. Approved? We're to be an official school, with a salary for the teacher and funds for supplies. Her eyes sparkled. They were impressed that a frontier woman had organized such a comprehensive curriculum. That's wonderful. Sweetheart? He reached across to squeeze her hand. You've worked so hard for this. We've worked hard, she corrected. I couldn't have done it without your support, or your carpentry skills. He chuckled, remembering the hours spent building desks and benches, transforming their barn into a makeshift classroom. It had been worth it to see the pride in Nora's eyes as she taught, to watch children who might otherwise never learn to read discover the magic of books. Is that the only news? He asked, noting the way she kept touching her belly. Nora's smile widened. Dr. Morrison stopped by as well. He confirmed what I suspected. She placed his hand on her stomach. Twins, he thinks, due in the spring. Elijah felt his throat tighten with emotion. After Rose's difficult birth, they'd feared they might not be blessed with more children. And now, twins, Rose piped up. Like the Murphy boys. Just like that, Nora confirmed. You're going to be a big sister twice over. Rose considered this seriously, then nodded. I'll teach them their letters, and how to feed the chickens, and let's let them be born first, Elijah suggested, ruffling her hair. After supper, they sat on the porch as had become their custom, Rose playing with her doll while her parents watched the stars emerge. The night was warm, summer crickets singing their endless song. Do you ever regret it? Nora asked softly, answering my letter, bringing a stranger into your life. Elijah pulled her closer. Every day I thank God for the courage to send that advertisement, and for sending me a woman brave enough to answer it. Even though I cried? She teased. Especially because you cried. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Those tears washed away walls I'd spent years building, showed me I wasn't as lost as I thought. They sat in comfortable silence, remembering those difficult early days, the awkward meals, the careful distances, the slow thawing of 2 frozen hearts. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. I have something for you, Elijah said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. I've been waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small velvet box. Inside lay a simple gold ring set with a small emerald. I know we've been married 5 years, but you never had a proper ring. Saw this in Denver last month and thought, it's beautiful, Nora breathed. But we can't afford. We can now. The horse sales have been good. The school will bring in steady money, and... He slipped the ring onto her finger above the plain band she'd worn since their wedding. You deserve beautiful things. Nora, you deserve everything. I have everything, she said, tears rolling down her cheeks, happy tears this time. I have you, our daughter, our babies on the way, our home. What more could I want? Are you crying, Mama? Rose looked up in concern. Happy tears, sweetheart, Nora assured her. Sometimes we cry when we're so happy our hearts can't hold it all. Rose nodded sagely. Like when Shadow had her puppies and you cried and Papa laughed. Exactly like that, Elijah confirmed, remembering Nora's emotional reaction to their dog's litter. As if summoned. Shadow appeared, now gray around the muzzle but still spry, followed by her remaining pup. A gangly adolescent Rose had named Sunshine despite his coal-black coat. Time for bed, little one. Nora said, tomorrow's a big day. New students coming to the school? Rose protested briefly but was soon yawning. Elijah carried her inside, tucking her into the small bed they'd built in what used to be Nora's lonely room. Now it bloomed with colorful quilts and toys, drawings of horses and wildflowers decorating the walls. "Tell me the story," Rose demanded sleepily. "About how you and Mama met." "Well," Elijah began, settling on the edge of her bed. "Once upon a time, there was a very lonely man who lived all by himself on a ranch. By the time he reached the part where the beautiful lady arrived on the stagecoach, Rose was fast asleep. He kissed her forehead gently, marveling as always at this miracle they'd created. He found Nora in their bedroom, brushing her hair before the mirror, the same mirror where he'd once glimpsed her and fled from the wanting. Now he stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "No more running," he said softly. "No more running." She agreed, leaning back against him. He wrapped his arms around her, hands splaying protectively over where their children grew. In the mirror, he could see them both, no longer the broken, frightened people who'd entered a loveless contract, but partners, lovers, parents, whole in ways neither had thought possible. Outside, a coyote called across the desert, answered by another. The sound that once seemed lonely now spoke of connection, of creatures finding each other across the vast darkness, just as they had found each other. "What are you thinking?" Nora asked, watching his face in the mirror. "About that first night, how you stood in the yard with your carpet bag, looking so lost. How I almost didn't open the door. But you did. But I did." He turned her in his arms. "Best decision I ever made, even if I fought it every step of the way." "Stubborn man," she said fondly. "Stubborn woman," he countered. "Good thing, too, a less stubborn woman would have given up on me." "Never," she said fiercely. "From the moment I decided to stay, you were stuck with me." They made love slowly, tenderly, mindful of her changing body but no less passionate for it. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the night sounds through the open window. The house around them was solid now, filled with laughter and love instead of silence and regret. "Elijah," Nora said into the darkness, "do you think they'll be boys or girls? The twins?" He considered. "Doesn't matter. They'll be loved either way, taught to be strong and kind, like their mother, maybe a little less stubborn than their father." "Oh, I don't know," Nora mused. "A little stubbornness can be a good thing. It brought us together, after all." "That it did," he agreed, pulling her closer. "That it did." As sleep claimed them, the moon rose full over Redemption Creek, bathing the transformed ranch in silver light. The garden rustled with night breezes. The roses on the porch released their perfume, and in the barn, a new litter of kittens mewed for their mother. Life thrived where once there had been only survival. Love bloomed where once there had been only loneliness. And in a bed that had once held a broken man's nightmares, two healed hearts beat as one, proof that sometimes the greatest risks brought the richest rewards. The mail-order bride who was never meant to be touched had become the center of a world remade by love. And the man who'd sworn never to feel again had learned that some promises were meant to be broken, especially when breaking them led to a life worth living. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed following Elijah and Nora's journey from strangers bound by necessity to partners united by love. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world these tales of the American frontier are reaching. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, redemption, and adventure in the untamed territories. What did you think of Elijah and Nora's story? Share your thoughts below.